Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to edition 102 of the Food Safety Fridays webinar program. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to today's presentation. Always something different, different topic, different presenters. And today the focus is going to be on BRC issue 8. And that's with David Braxton from the BRC and Kathleen Wyborn from DMV GL Business Assurance. Before we meet David and Kathleen, just a few things. The Food Safety Fridays program is sponsored, helps to bring you this free updates and education, and you get a certificate of attendance as well, and that's courtesy of our kind sponsors DMV GL Business Assurance, AIB International, Metal of Toledo, Safe Food 360 and Trace Analytics. They support this, so thank you to them. As many of you know, the regulars, the chat bar there, say hello, tell us where you're from. 102 webinars so far. I think there's probably only one person who's been to all 102, and that's me. But tell us where you're from, and tell me how many you've attended. That would be nice, just for a bit of interest. So type your comments in there, type your questions throughout the webinar. We won't pick those up until the end. We'll mark them and we will pick them up at the end when we have the Q&A. Right, at this point, I'd like to introduce you to our special guests, Kathleen and David. Hi, Kathleen. Hi, David.
Hi, hello. Good afternoon.
Good day.
Hi. Okay, first, Kathleen, where are you dialing in from today, Kathleen?
Actually, I'm outside of Los Angeles, California.
Specifically?
We're on holiday in Disneyland.
Yay!
Yeah.
Look at that for dedication. Kathleen's taken a break into a holiday, and today, I need to say, is 10-year anniversary of Kathleen being at DNV GL Business Assurance. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, to the date, yes.
Yeah. So, yes, celebrations all round. And David?
Well, I'm much less exotic location, I'm afraid. I'm just in London in the office, but right. It's nice anyway.
At BRC headquarters, is that?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I'll just tell the audience about next week's webinar, where you get your slides prepared. Next week, you'll see in the sidebar we've got Cor Gronfeld. He's from FSSC 22000, and Cor's going to be talking about experience with HACCP systems, strengths and weaknesses in practice. So that should be an interesting topic, because I'm sure many of you manage HACCP systems, and so you need to know about that. Right. Anybody put a figure in the sidebar? No. Oh, well. Never mind. Right. We're going to now move on to the presentation. I'll be back for the Q&A later. And yeah, shall we switch our webcams off, Kathleen? Yeah. Okay, over to you, David.
Very good. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you very much indeed to IFSQN to give us a chance to explain a little bit about what's going on with the BRC standards, and of course for DNV, who've invited me to speak. I hope you're going to find this a useful insight into to what's happening in our world and how you may want to prepare for the issue 8 standard as it comes forward. What we're planning to cover today is I want to give you a little bit of a background to how we developed the standard. We'll talk about some of the key changes, so you've got an insight into what's expected and why, and more importantly, I guess, why we've made the changes. Talk a little bit about one or two of the protocol changes. That's how the rules work for the standard and where they've changed, so you understand that. And then I'll hand over to Kathleen, who will take you through much more from the auditor and certification body perspective and give you a really good overview of how you will expect to see the audits pan out in time. I think it's always important to put in context the work that we're trying to do and understand, why we have made changes to the standard. We typically review our standards about every 3 years, and there are usually a number of things which have occurred in that period which become the focus of that review process. We're obviously a GFSI benchmarked scheme, so we have to keep an eye on any changes which may be coming forward in the benchmarking documents and new ideas which are coming forward from all the GFSI work to ensure that we cover that within the standard. One of the big aims of the BRC standard, of course, is to try and reduce duplication of audits and take out some of that audit burden. So we, at each occasion for the rewrite, we focus very carefully around what users of the standard are asking for, and try to take out or give less reasons why anybody would want to do their own audit. So we need to be very focused on that. This time around, we've also had the FISMA regulations, which have come into force since issue 7 of the standard. So we need to review the standard to make sure that our clauses were relevant to FISMA or could be adapted to FISMA as appropriate. There's been a lot of discussion around food safety culture. So one of the challenges for our group really was to look at food safety culture and how we could look at incorporating something to do with that into the standard. So that was a big topic for us. We look obviously always at the scope of the standard, and we're aware that the standard is used a lot by pet food manufacturers in the absence of anything else. So we wanted to make sure that we could extend the scope to cover specific requirements in those areas. And also, very importantly, we also review incidents, recalls and issues which have occurred since the last issue of the standard, because the whole objective of this is to produce safe food consistently. And where we have a lot of recalls, or when we need to understand the type of recalls we get and use that to try and adapt our standard to make it as safe as possible in terms of production of food. And actually, when you look at recalls, although allergens is often seen as the main recall, when you look at the root cause, it's usually to do with issues around labelling and packing. So that was a focus for us in terms of the development of the standard. Although it's identified as the BRC global standard, actually it's a collaborative effort. When we develop a standard, we take on board the views of all the different stakeholders. We have working groups set up both in the US and in Europe who help contribute and develop the standard. We have present in those development meetings the retailers and food service companies, so that we reflect on their particular requirements and their issues. We importantly have the trade associations for manufacturers, who both make sure that what's being asked for is sensible and adding value, but also that in their own turn we're addressing issues which they may be finding from their raw material suppliers. We have independent experts. We have certification bodies such as DNV who attend a number of the meetings and make sure that whatever is being proposed is auditable. And we break up occasionally into subcommittees to develop that work. So it's a collaborative effort which goes on over a period of about 6 months with all the different stakeholders until we get to a process where we have a standard that we think is ready for exposure to the market. We put it out then for wider consultation, and we had around about 1,100 comments back on that consultation, and then the working group look again at that, taking in view on board all the issues that have been raised, and we do our best then to create a standard which has since been published. So it's quite a long and exhaustive process, and we try to get as much input as possible to make sure that it really is fit for purpose. So I want to move on now and look at some of the key changes in the standard and help you to understand why we've done what we've done and how it may affect yourselves. One of the key focuses for this rewrite of the standard has been the role of management in terms of ensuring food safety in sites. And we felt that there was the real need for us to be focusing more around the management, getting senior management more involved in the process. And you'll see coming forward this time that there'll be interviews taking place between the auditor and the most senior management on the site to really understand how they see food safety fitting into the business, how it's reflected in things such as the overall objectives that are being set for the business, how communication works down the business, how it's seen as in terms of the priorities within the overall drivers of the business. Because we do feel very strongly, and I think the group feel very strongly, that management leads food safety in businesses, and without the commitment of the most senior management within the site, the technical manager, who often gets asked to carry this, will always struggle to get the right voice and to be able to develop things as he may wish, or he or she may wish. And along with that goes the food safety and culture of the business, which is embedded very much around those management disciplines. So talking of food safety culture has been a real focus for us at the Global Standards for some little while. It's much talked of, and we're very keen to try and find a safe way of actually introducing the notion of food safety culture within the audit program. But we also recognised that auditing food safety culture is not really a viable option for an auditor undertaking the audit himself or herself. The challenge being that often it's what goes on in the business when nobody's watching. It's those underlying behaviours which really contribute to the culture of a business, or to demonstrate the culture of the business. And clearly, that isn't auditable in its own right. What we did want to do, however, was to raise awareness of food safety culture, to allow sites to explore and understand what food safety culture actually is, what are the contributing factors to it, and actually start to be looking at their cultures and developing the stronger and stronger food safety cultures, because the influence that will make on the overall food safety within the business. So to that end, we've come up with 3 requirements which have actually gone into the standard. And the important thing here is these are relatively flexible in terms of approach. So we expect businesses now going forward to be thinking about the culture within their business, to be identifying areas where they feel for their own particular business they can develop the culture further, to set themselves a plan of how they're going to go about doing that, and then activities which will help to embody that plan. So it may be, for instance, that there are issues around communication which they feel need to be improved. It may be that they feel that actually they need to do more work around empowering workers within the factory to take responsibility for things. It may be issues around communication, as I say. It may be training. Whatever sort of activity they feel that they can strengthen and improve within their own business to improve culture would form their plan. So we're flexible, we're not dictating how they do it. What we are asking for them is to undertake an assessment, to plan activities for the coming year, which they will then implement. And the auditor will be coming in and looking at the plan, see that they've actually got one. They will be looking at how the activities are being implemented, and not in the first year, but in the second year, they'll be looking to see how that actual activity has been carried out and how effective it has been in terms of improving the culture within the business. And that's how we are approaching food safety culture. And they are auditable requirements, but to be very, very clear, we're not expecting auditors to be trying to assess the food safety culture per se within factories. We don't believe that's doable. An important aspect of this is communication, and you will see new clauses in the standard which are really to do with communication. There are 2, in fact. One is about the ability of employees to be able to communicate up and down the management chain issues or ideas for improvement, and that comes through in the management meetings. The other area is where there are blockages in that chain. We want to introduce safe systems where employees who may have a concern about a food safety issue are able to report in a safe way to senior management, anonymously if necessary, so that issues can be addressed by that senior management. Some people would class that as a sort of a whistleblowing type system. So we are expecting that to be introduced within the sites. Many sites already have something of this ilk, but we do think this is really important in terms of ensuring that there's a real connection between the employees and potential for issues in the factories themselves. So you'll see that in the clause 1.16, and that may be through an internal process, or for very small sites they may want to use an external independent body for who retrieves issues and that might be being reported up and then reports those through to management. So that's new to the Issue 8 standard. I talked about the FISMA regulations and how we needed to review the standard in terms of FISMA. In fact, very little has changed, but we were conscious of the fact that in FISMA, they talk about preventative controls and they talk about the food safety plan rather than the Codex HACCP per se. We didn't want to be in a situation where sites were expected to have both a HACCP plan termed using the terminology of HACCP for BRC certification, and then have a separate plan with different terminology for the US regulators in terms of food safety plan and prerequisite programs. So we carefully examined the clauses within the BRC HACCP program, and you'll see some new wording in there to help to ensure that the program that's put in place, particularly in America and for sites that are supplying into America, they can have a single program which fits both BRC and FISMA requirements. So there'll be subtle wording changes in there, but no real concrete changes in terms of what our expectations around this section. An area that we have focused on in Issue 8 has been around internal audits. For us, the internal audit program is absolutely critical in terms of ensuring that the food safety systems that you've adapted in sites and put in place to address the clauses within the standard are being assessed for their effectiveness in detail periodically through the year. There's been some confusion about this, and we're noticing that in many sites they consider an internal audit program to be a checklist of the BRC standard, which is undertaken prior to a BRC audit. Well, there is a value in that, but that's really not what we're talking about in terms of internal audits. Internal audits are about your systems, evaluating them in some detail and making sure they're operating as you want them to. And when there's a discrepancy, it may be because the people are not acting in the way that you expect them to, or it may be that they're acting, that your systems or the way you've described your procedures doesn't really effectively address the issues, and either of those can be corrected. So you'll see in the standard reference now to at least 4 internal audits during an annual cycle, and that's really to encourage the idea that this is a continuous process and not something which is just done once prior to a BRC audit. Raw material and supplier approval is always a very important area. We've reviewed that area. No major changes. We've defined primary packaging. So that's, in our terms, that is the packaging materials which a consumer will take away when they purchase the product, so that there's a clearer definition about that, and we can differentiate, therefore, in terms of how you manage processes for primary packaging as opposed to outer cases and the like. We introduced a review of your raw material risk assessments. We do expect those to be reviewed periodically, and we've set clearer expectations about where you're auditing your suppliers, but they're being done by second parties to make sure that the effectiveness of that audit process is comparable to, say, a GFSI certification. So you'll see some changes there. We've focused on root cause analysis within the standard. I mean, clearly an effective root cause analysis is absolutely critical in terms of preventing future issues occurring whenever something has happened. It's part of a learning process. To that end, we'd referenced root cause analysis in several places throughout the standard. This time around, we've added a clause which actually asks for you to have a procedure for root cause analysis, and set some expectations around when we would expect a root cause analysis to be undertaken. So if you're getting recurring trends or problems, then that clearly is an indication that something needs to be looked at in depth to try and understand what's causing the issue, and obviously to address that. Or where a serious non-conformity is occurring, which may affect safety, legality, or quality of a product. Clearly, under those circumstances, a proper root cause analysis to get to the heart of the problem and sort it is essential. So this has been played up within the standard and now has a separate clause, 3.7.3. An area that we've strengthened a little bit more this time around is around product security and food defense. It's an area that plays very well in the Americas, and they do very, very well. In Europe, it's a newer concept for us. But this is all about identifying risks in your business from people who may wish to undertake malicious attacks or contaminate product. And the standard covered this partly last time. We've extended this a little bit more. We're looking for a threat assessment plan based on the risks to be incorporated now. And differently this time, rather than just looking, as we did previously, around security of the buildings and access, so external threats, we also need you to be thinking a little bit about potential for internal threats from disgruntled staff or whatever who may want to do harm to your products. So not massive difference, but internal threats now looked at as well, and we need a plan coming out of the process. So these are the particular clauses. So undertaking risk assessment and then implementing the controls that you want, reviewing this periodically to make sure that your food defense processes are effective. Physical contamination has always been a big emphasis within the standard, and those of you familiar with issue 8 will have seen there's a huge amount in the standard around metal detection and foreign body control. This always gets reviewed, and on this particular occasion a couple of areas have been pulled up for particular emphasis as gaps, and they are around the way that you manage the transfer of raw materials from their packaging into mixes to make sure that we don't get transfer over of packaging materials, etc. And there was a call for some more information around pens. So you'll see there's some requirements about pens that are used within the factories. Another big area of change really within the standard you need to be focused on is that around environmental monitoring. Environmental monitoring was in the previous version of the standard, but it was hidden away, and you had to work hard to understand where the requirements were. Clearly, effective environmental monitoring is really, really important in terms of rooting out and eliminating risks of microbiological contamination within your product, both from a food safety and a food quality point of view in terms of pathogens. IFSQN have had a couple of very good webinars over the last few months looking at environmental monitoring, and I'd suggest you look back at those for some ideas on how this might take place. But this is new to the standard and something which you will need to look at. The way that you set up the programs clearly will be very much dependent on your own factory environment and the type of products that you are manufacturing. But we would expect environmental monitoring programs to be in place as a minimum where you are in high risk or high care areas. We set out in the standard our requirements around it. This clause for 11.81 actually sets out what you need to do in terms of documenting your process for your environmental monitoring programs, and clearly that forms the procedure. At the assessment, the auditor will obviously be looking at that, seeking understanding from you as to why you've structured it in the way that you have, and obviously looking at the results of your program and how you've acted upon those results. I mentioned to you at the beginning that one of our focuses is around areas of greatest issues, if you like, and recalls. Labelling and packaging issues tend to be one of the bigger challenges that we're seeing coming through in terms of recalls. With issue 7 of the standard, we did a lot of work in this area and added a number of new clauses. We have seen some effectiveness from this, but clearly it still is the major cause of recalls around the world. So we wanted to re-examine that again in depth and see if there's more that we could do to try and reduce this. Very often the issues occur because of genuine simple mistakes, and I think our approach needs to be about putting systems in to reduce the risk of people just making mistakes. So the sort of things that we've been looking at this time around is the way that we manage obsolete packaging. So very often you will have a situation where you change a raw material on a packaging that then requires a change in the labelling and the ingredient declarations. Probably not very much else changes on that particular label or piece of packaging. The change is then sent and the printers will make the change, but it's really quite difficult often to identify the previous obsolete piece of packaging from the new packaging which has come in, and often mistakes occur around this. So the way that we manage obsolete packaging, the way that we assess and verify that the packaging which has been delivered to the site is actually the new version and not stocks which may have been held by the printer waiting call off. And those sort of systems are areas that we've been focusing on and have been upgraded and be looked at in more depth. We've also looked, in the last standard, we put some processes in for online verification of label and label information. It's not compulsory, but obviously it is encouraged. You can have it or you don't need to have it. But what we did find is, or what was suggested is, that sometimes people put the online verification systems in place to check the labels and then take away all of the other controls. And unfortunately then, if a mistake gets made and the verification equipment hasn't been set up and tested effectively, everybody thinks everything is okay and it flies through. So we put in tests for that verification equipment where you have it to make sure you're making best use of that assurance. And the labeling, the label content will be reviewed as part of the vertical audit, which forms a part of the BRC process. Fraud and vulnerability assessment clauses were in the previous version of the BRC standard. This is now going into a number of the other GFSI recognised standards, just coming out in those standards. There's a certain level of maturity amongst the BRC sites, clearly, because you've been doing this for quite some time. The changes are very minimal. We just needed some changes around terminology, so we've used the word plan, which links into the GFSI terminology which is used, so you'll see that in there. And obviously the need for the continual review of those plans in response to changes in economic circumstances, market intelligence and issues, etc. So the only changes that you will see in this area. Otherwise that's business very much as usual. In terms of the standard itself, you're aware obviously that BRC Global Standards has high risk and high care zones. We've not made any substantial changes to our expectations here. There are one or two more detailed clauses to make people think about what's brought in and out and how of these areas and how that is managed to prevent risk. But what we have done is to consolidate all of the clauses which relate to high care and high risk zones and put them into a new section at the end of the standard. The idea really here is to make it much easier for people to use the standard if you've got high risk and high care zones, because all the requirements are together. And conversely, if you don't have high risk and high care within your business, then then this area then becomes an area which you don't need to focus on, and it's not cluttering up the rest of the standard. So a change there in the structure of the standard rather than a lot of change in the requirements. Similarly, we had a voluntary or additional module which covered traded goods in issue 7 of the standard. These are products which maybe you buy in and sell on to complement the range of products which you're manufacturing yourselves. Previously you were allowed to include those in an additional module if you wanted the systems for managing those suppliers to be assessed. This time around we've introduced it into the standard itself, so it's a new section within the standard, section 9 of the standard. But as previously, you can choose whether you want to have the traded goods module included in your assessment or not. It's entirely up to yourselves. Where it isn't included, it will be listed as an exclusion, just to make it clear to customers. But it's entirely up to yourselves whether you want to include it or not. So that's a change that you will note. So in terms of the audit protocol itself, these are the rules by which the audits are undertaken. Not major changes, a few subtle changes coming through here. We've really what we were trying to do was just to carry out a little bit of simplification of the protocol section of the standard, but also very much to be looking at the reports themselves, and to make sure that they were most effective in terms of the audit and information which is being transferred up to customers and the like. So to pull these out, the unannounced audits, which BRC have had in place for quite some time, they remain. We've removed the option 2 unannounced audit process because actually very, very few sites were using that. Everybody either goes for full unannounced or for an announced audit. So we've removed the option 2 unannounced audit to ensure that because that wasn't really being used, and that simplifies the system. The use of unannounced is still voluntary, as it was for issue 7. So no real changes is there in terms of our expectations. The bigger changes coming through around the audit report itself. And what we were trying to do here was to reduce the time between the audit actually taking place and people having an understanding of the results of the audit, because classically with BRC, the global standards, we have 42 days between the audit taking place and the actual audit result being posted onto the website. Where you are looking to take on a new customer, that perhaps is sometimes too long for them to have an indication as to whether how well you're doing. So to give people a heads up, we're looking at introducing an interim report, which will just provide information, basic information about the site and the audit, and the issues that have been identified at the audit. And that will be loaded up within 10 days to give us sort of a level of transparency for those customers that you've allowed access to your audit reports, and that will be replaced by the full audit report within 42 days. It's just a way of actually giving people an indication of how that process is developing. The other more significant change that we're trying to bring in is the way that is to use technology to improve the way in which our audit reports are created. BRC audit reports tend to be very detailed. There's an element for which that's quite important, because this paints the picture of your food safety management systems for customers, which obviously they like to understand, particularly when or if issues occur. However, there is a danger that the way we approach this encourages a behaviour amongst the auditors to be collecting information at the expense of time just assessing the validity or challenging the validity of the approach that you're taking, and indeed making sure that what you're actually set out to do is being effectively implemented. So over time, you will see a change in the audit reports. We understand that there's a lot of information which is collected, which changes very little from audit to audit, and we're facilitating that through a static information which will be doesn't need to be re-entered by the auditor on each occasion. They will just verify that no significant changes have taken place, and then they will spend more time focusing around things like management interviews and time understanding the implementation of these processes. So we hope that will change the audit behaviour and add to the efficiency and effectiveness, really, and value for you of the total audit process. So what can you expect at an issue 8 audit? Many of the same approaches that we've always had. You'll have an opening meeting. There'll be a site visit where the auditor will go out into the site, obviously, and review and talk to people and assess what's happening. You can expect that in an audit, the auditor will go back into the factory on 2 or 3 occasions. There won't be a single site or tour and then revert to paperwork. Clearly, there is an element of documentation which needs to be reviewed, and that will be undertaken. There'll be a high emphasis on talking to staff and getting staff to explain why they do what they do if things go wrong, checking their understanding and their comfort level with food safety systems and their influence on it. There'll be more interviews of the most senior management, as I expressed earlier, to ensure that there is a real connect between food safety and their priorities within the business. The auditors will be looking at a product changeover to understand how that is managed and talking with supervisors to understand the checks that are done online to assess that the changeover is effective, labels are changed, clean down processes are okay. The auditors will be encouraged to see a line startup, again, to understand the pre-op checks that are done on the line to make sure it's effectively clean, etc. They will be looking at how equipment is cleaned, and it may very well be that they will ask for certain pieces of equipment which are not running on a particular day to be opened up so they can have a more in-depth review of the standards of cleaning. A key feature again of the standard is what we call our vertical audit, which is where you take a product which has been produced typically 2 to 4 months prior to the audit date, and every piece of information relating to the production of that product, raw materials supplied, etc., is used as an audit right through that process, getting the documents together and understanding how that process and that was managed. Again, as normal, we will do a mass balance check, particularly around raw materials where claims may be made, so we can identify that you can identify from a raw material where that raw material was used in a series of through the various productions. And there'll be a review of the labels. So there'll be a check of a label, probably done as part of the vertical audit, where we'll understand from you how you came up with the ingredients list and claims, etc., on a label. And then clearly the whole lot will be focused into a closing meeting at the end of the audit. So there's some of the key changes. Just in terms of a couple of things that you might want to be thinking about, we have published a changes document which highlights all the changes between issue 7 and issue 8. We also have an interpretation guideline available which takes each clause and looks in detail at the sort of things that you might want to understand in terms of how that clause is supposed to be applied and what it all means. We also have a number of guidelines which help to support the standard, which are being updated at the moment. A number are already published, and many they will all be updated by February when the standard starts. For those of you that are sites that are already certified to the BRC Global Standards, you do have free access to the BRC Participate, which is an online library of all of these documents, which enables you to click through, look at standards, look at the guidance documents, look at the change documents, look at all the guidelines that we've produced. But you do need to register for that. So I would very strongly encourage you to go on to the BRC Participate website and register so that you can actually access all of that material for free. And that will be a great help, I think, in terms of your preparation for the coming issue 8 of the standard. So that's given you a bit of background. The standard itself will start in terms of audits in February, the 1st of February. But I'd like to turn over now to Kathleen, and Kathleen will perhaps take you through some of the changes and some of the issues from an auditor and certification body perspective. So, Kathleen.
Thank you, David. What I want to do here in the next couple minutes is spend a little bit of time about what goes on behind in a CB's perspective with the auditors and how they prepare for changes. As far as from the auditor's perspective, and although the changes are in the way that they're auditing is somewhat significant, the change to the standard itself is not that big to the auditors. So they will be going through training. And in fact, right now, our ATP in the US is going through her training, and then she will therefore train the auditors on the changes on BRC 8. We always do this at our annual calibration, and this is scheduled in January. For any standard change updates, the auditors have to go through rigorous training as far as the changes so that they can clearly understand, and also the reviewers within DNV in Europe, they go through the same training. So it's a systematic way of change control and ensuring everybody is up to date. So as David said, the new standard is effective February 1st, so all the auditors will be auditing to the standard at that time. As far as from the perspectives, as usual, we will, it's the same similar process except for the added update with the interim audit report that David spoke about, but we'll be issuing the certificate as normal with the new version. And the interim report, I think it is key to our process in that it gets the needed information out to those that require this in a shorter period of time than it took to get the whole audit through the process and uploaded to the BRC website. Expectations from the auditors, I spoke a little bit about this already. The methodology has changed subtly with the focus on the verification and the amount of time that they're spending interviewing top management. Ever since, with BRC, BRC is really focused on the top management commitment, and this is a big effort that they're taking and we're taking to ensure that that's there. So the auditors will still, though, however, be reviewing documents, records. They'll be walking around the site, interviewing, observing processes such as the changeovers, as David mentioned, to make sure that the labels have been pulled, everything is correctly set up for the new production that they're making, the new process, as far as the actual components that they're using. So that the auditors will be taking, same notes on their compliances, out of compliances, minor, major, critical. So that's really not a change to them. The organization shall be expected from the auditor to be focused on the changes. For example, we will be sending out the audit plan, including all the applicable requirements. We will be highlighting those that are new for your reference, and dedicating the ample time for the interviews with top management staff to review, to make sure that they have, we collect objective evidence about the intent of the standard and the management commitment. We will also be auditing and verifying, again, the existing requirements. So as far as the DNV customers, we have already sent out the technical advisory notices that go over the key changes in BRC 8. So trying to make sure that ample communication is out to the industry about this, and also if there's any updates to the terms and conditions, which may be different for each version. So there is a little bit of behind the scenes paperwork that goes on with the actual audits. So again, some of this has already been covered by David. I don't think I really want to go into this in detail, but from the auditor's perspective, they're looking at this as the key changes, the amount of time with the interviews and the verifications to the specific changes that are in version 8. So as far as steps to get ready, we always recommend that, of course, you download, you get a copy of the new version 8 standard, and that's free in the electronic copy on the BRC website. Attend a webinar. These webinars are great, and there's so much information that is being shared at these webinars to get the industry ready for BRC current sites that are certified, and even those that are looking at, they might be certified to a different standard at this time, but looking at something that's new and the focus might be better suited for them with BRC. DNVGL, we also offer formal training, both in public type webinars and also formal training on site. So it depends on what you would want with that, but really ensure that the requirements of the standards are implemented. And the biggest thing that we get, and a lot of the questions here, is the internal audit cycle, and make sure that you have included the BRC requirements in your in your internal audit. That is one thing that we find as a CB and from the auditors, that they sometimes is overlooked, but probably one of the most significant monitoring steps within any site is for management is that internal audit and what it's telling you, and that you are taking the necessary actions based upon what that internal audit, the information coming back to management. Just a little bit about DNVGL for those who might not know us. We're a foundation, and our vision is safeguarding life, property, and the environment, and driven by our purpose. In business assurance, we work with both the large multinationals because of our global footprint, and also the smaller local companies, so in both certification and training. What's new at DNVGL? And I just want to mention one of the highlights that we started a couple months ago, and that's all of our certificates are tagged on a blockchain, and anybody can look at a certificate that DNVGL has and take a scan of it to ensure that it is authentic. So in any way, it's a way of us looking at fraud. With that, I just want to show our contact information for both David and myself, who we can give, sorry for the background noise here, give some additional information that comes up if you have questions specific to the BRC, the changes. But we're going to go through a good Q&A session here with Simon here in a couple minutes. But please, I see a lot of questions coming up here which are very significant to this change in the standard, but we can answer them here, but we can also answer them at a later time. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Simon to go through the Q&A.
Okay, then if you can put your webcams back on, we'll stop sharing, and mics on. Let's have a look. There we go. Right. Really, I'm a bit of a schoolboy error. I should have said save your questions till the end, because they're way down there, a lot of them. So if you did ask a question earlier, please post it again. Let's start with this one then. Susan Anatone, for Food Safety Culture Clause 1, what's that second? Yeah, Food Safety Culture Clause 1, will it be expected to have one action plan that could encompass several departments, or will each department, such as quality, purchasing, operations, etc., need to have their own plan? David, can you switch your mic on?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, so the intent really is that to keep this as flexible as possible. What we're trying to do with the culture is to make the culture clause is to sort of nudge factories towards thinking about culture and putting activities in place to be continually improving the food safety culture. So to that end, there may be one overarching plan which covers many areas. The important thing to recognize is that everybody in the business has a part to play in the culture. So everybody needs to be touched by the food safety culture, be it engineers, be it operators in the line, be it the buyers, because food safety comes into all of their environments in one way or another. So often the plans, as we see them, will actually be all encompassing and will cover all of those departments. Whether you do it as a series of individual plans, or whether as a business you have a single plan which looks right across the business, we don't mind. The important thing for us is that you're thinking about the culture and you're actually putting into place some actions which will hopefully strengthen the culture within your own business.
Okay, yeah, thanks, David. Anne Cooper, what is the designation of, or the meaning of the yellow highlighted areas of the standard? Is there a meaning to this?
Yes, I'm sorry, I perhaps should have explained. When I put up the slides with the clauses in them, the yellow highlighted areas were the words that had changed between the issue 7 and the issue 8 standard. So that's what that is. But as I say, if you are on the BRC participate, you can get hold of the change document, which highlights all of the individual changes between issue 7 and issue 8, and that's probably a very useful document for you to be looking at.
Okay. Graham Dale, does the requirements for 4 internal audits require the total system to be audited 4 times per year?
Not just 4 times a year. I think it's a very interesting conversations that we had in our working groups around this. The point is that if you've got an effective internal audit system, you are checking the processes that you've decided you want to put in place for your food safety system and making sure that they're working effectively. Really, you should be breaking up those processes and looking at each of them in some detail at different times through the year. We were pushed to put a minimum number of times because people like numbers. So 4 was seen as the absolute minimum, but really to do it effectively, you'll break them up. You'll break up your systems and look at them as appropriate at different times through the year. And that's the intent.
Okay. Janet Voltman Anderson, are frozen vegetables high care now? The flowchart seems to imply they are low risk despite recent listeria outbreaks.
That's a really good question. Yes, I mean, it is quite challenging. We've had listeria outbreaks, particularly around things like some frozen products like frozen sweet corn, which are actually used in salad materials, so they have no further heat process. So I think we do need to be thinking about the packing, the post blanching areas within those operations and the controls that we have in place to ensure that that those types of materials are not exposed to recontamination. So in that context, I think we need to be thinking very much around some of the high care type approaches. Yeah, the world is changing.
Yeah, always. Thank you. Joseph, if you have established a pen control policy with a risk analysis, would it be mandatory to have metal detectable pens?
Yes, I think we've gone down the route of saying metal detectable pens, assuming you've got metal detectors, of course, in the factories. Yeah.
But those pens also tend to be designed like single piece construction, don't they?
They do. Yeah.
So
yes, it's the whole piece, really. The whole looking at the pen and the type of pen that's being used. Yes.
Okay. Heiter, could you explain further how the food safety commitment leadership interviews will or could be rated in terms of non-conformity? Okay.
Right. So this is another very good question. So our expectation is that the auditor will sit down with the senior management and say, well, look, okay, can you take me through your business plans? Just explain to me where food safety fits into this. Can you explain to me how you actually you say food safety is obviously very important to your business. Just explain to me how you make sure that it is, and it's and how it's communicated. How does it actually work in practice within your own business? The reality is that issues are more likely to be raised around some of the components of it. So it's important to get that interview because we want to make sure that the senior management's involved and we want to hear it from them. But actually, the failings are more likely to be around the fact that the objectives are not particularly well identified, they're not being achieved. There's a resource issue which comes up because we're seeing a lot of instances of, where the buildings are falling to pieces, or there's inadequate numbers of staff to carry out the jobs as they've wanted to. So it actually manifests itself in other areas of the standard where probably the non-conformities would actually be raised. So it's all part of a whole, really, rather than.
Right. Somebody did ask, I've just remembered earlier on the same theme, about the length of time taken for these interviews. Would there be additional time added to the audit itself?
Well, at the moment, we're not planning to increase the time. What we always do with the new standard is to is once it's been out and been operating for a few months and people have become familiar with it, then we review with the certification bodies whether there is an issue with the length or duration of the audit. What we actually want to do is take away from some of the time that's spent collecting information to populate the audit report and reallocate that time more meaningfully into things like the management interviews and time spent looking and observing and talking to people in the factory. So I don't really want to per se increase the time. These audits are long enough anyway, but what I want to do is to reallocate the time so it's most effective and adds most value really to the sites.
Maybe the attendee that asked that question thinks senior management might waffle on a bit longer than I don't know. Anyway, it's not for me to say. Atil Gedik, what is whistleblowing in terms of BRC 8? I think.
Okay, it's a good shout. We very deliberately didn't use the word whistleblowing, although it occurred in the drafts, because we recognise that that's a very it's not recognised the same all around the world. It's used as a sort of colloquialism in some places. Essentially, it's about the ability of employees to be able to raise issues or concerns that they have with senior management in a safe way, where they feel that raising it with maybe that their supervisor or direct manager they may feel is the cause of a challenge or a concern. And they need to have a way of actually being able to raise those concerns safely with the most senior management, so that something can be done about it. And that's the essence of what we're looking for here. It's sometimes called whistleblowing.
Okay. Right, Manfred, what are the expectations from senior management related to objectives specifically?
Okay, so within issue 7 of the standard, you have a sort of a tiered approach. So you've got a policy. So most companies will have a policy which says how important food safety is, blah, 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 blah. But what we're really looking for, how is that manifested in terms of the activities within the business? Have you set yourselves objectives which will be continuously improving food safety within the business, and how are they focused? So objectives may be around training a number of staff or improvements in training. They could be very concrete things like we intend to try and drive our customer complaint levels down by 5%. We want to reduce the number of non-conformities that we find in our product, which would cause us to actually hold product. There'll be a number of manifestations, I suppose, of how that policy is put into objectives which were set for the business and which then are being measured and fed back, and so you're actually driving that continuous improvement. So in the management interviews, what we're really looking for is, well, how did you establish, on what basis did you look and see these as your objectives? How does it sort of correlate with your overall policy? How are you using the information and disseminating progress on those objectives? What are you doing when, as happens, you don't always hit your objectives? How do you review that? It's that process of actually putting into place the sort of the high espoused policies into something which is a bit more concrete in terms of driving food safety.
Okay, thanks, David. Kathleen, are you in California?
I sure am, yes.
Do you know anything about walnuts? There's a question there from Akansha. Has the California walnut industry addressed pasteurization requirements standards like the almond industry?
That's a question that I will have to take back to my technical staff. Quite frankly, yeah, I can't.
It's very sort of specific and detailed.
Right. Right.
Okay. I thought I'd give it a shot. Right. Margaret is asking, what is the best way to establish a food fraud program utilizing USP food fraud database at this time?
I mean, I can lend some thought into this. That is one of the ways of utilizing the database is for information about the the ingredients that are seeing the fraudulent activities. There's others, but I have been very familiar with this one, and I do see that a lot of, especially in the U.S., the sites with the auditors, they're seeing that they are establishing information, gathering it from the USP. So that is one of the ways, and it is a good way.
Okay, metal detectable pens will not go away. Metal detectable pens, this is from Angad. What if there are no metal detectors in the facility?
Well, I think it comes back then to making sure you've got a single piece pen that isn't likely to break up. So you actually set your requirements around that. Effectively, what we're trying to do here is to be thinking about what are the risks from pens. It's breaking off, the pen gets into a product. It's not I don't see it as being a massive risk, but we were aware that a number of specifiers actually have pen policies, and as part of this process, they're trying to make sure that we are in line with different people, so they don't go and do their own audits. This was added.
Okay. Monica, we are coming across auditors who look at ingredients that do not have a status of ready to eat, and manufacturers are expected to have a validated kill step. How big of a focus will this be for BRC, and what can a plant do to cover this? Is that a bit?
So these are. So these are manufacturers of a product which which in itself doesn't have a kill step. So you're reliant on a kill step for the raw material that you're using. Is that the context? And if in that case, I mean, the auditors would be focused very much on the controls on how you're managing your raw material supplier to make sure that the product that's being delivered to you is effective, and that they would probably be a high risk raw material to you. So in our terms, you would probably either be looking for a GFSI audit of that supplier, or to have had an audit undertaken by somebody who has the qualifications and covers the scope to look at those risks, and we would be looking at that, and that's the way that we would expect the auditors to be assessing that.
Okay, thanks. I'm conscious we've just gone over the hour, but are you okay for 5 minutes just to carry on, David, Kathleen?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Audience, if you do need to get away, conscious of time, we will issue the slides, certificate and recording afterwards by email, so you won't miss anything. All right, Jocelyn, how to integrate food safety culture in the manual or documentation?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't focus on incorporating into the manual as such. I think this is more of an operational thing. So you will set objectives around and a plan around your food safety culture. I mean, clearly that needs to be communicated amongst the management team and the people who are going to implement it. So the auditor will be looking to see what that plan looks like, and then they'll be looking at what you're actually doing materially to actually implement that plan. I'm not a great fan of just listing things or writing things into quality manuals. It's about the activity, the doing of it, that's most important, I think.
Okay. Christina, how would we verify authenticity of an audit certificate without the report other than the BRC? Not everyone has a directory. The directory, is that free to access for certificates?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the BRC Global Standards Directory. Yes, it's freely available. Anybody can go onto the directory. You can search for the site name or the site code if you know the site code, and all the certificate details then are available. So the date, the grade, that's freely available on BRC. And we actually push. And the reason we push that is because unfortunately, there are fraudulent certificates about. Occasionally. Also, if you're presented with a certificate, a hard copy certificate, how do you know whether an issue has occurred since the certificate was issued, which may have resulted in that certificate being suspended? The only way you can do that is through a live online feed, and I think most of the GFSI schemes, most of them have do actually provide the opportunity for you to actually verify that the certificate presented to you is in fact a valid certificate. And that's what we're looking for.
Rightio. Thank you. Burada, can you, integrity, what's the definition of the word integrity in BRC 8?
Okay, so when we're talking about product integrity, we're meaning that it is what it says it is. So if you've it's used mostly in the context of food fraud. So if you're actually saying, it's got this claim on it, it is what it says it is. That's what we're thinking of in terms of the integrity.
Okay, right. That's a good question here. Neil, during an announced audit on site with very few planned changeovers, how can we do startups and changeovers be monitored by the auditor if there's nothing planned?
Okay. Well, there will be, with everything in the standard, there will be occasions and types of industries where there's very little changeover. If you go to a flour mill or something like that, these things just run. And clearly in those circumstances, it's likely it's not the auditor won't have the opportunity to see a changeover. They may well see a changeover at the packing end. Say in a flour mill, if you're bagging flour as well, you may well change from one product to another, which enables them at least to see how code changes are done and how the packaging is changed. The auditors will take a pragmatic view on it, and wherever they can, they will look to see the changeovers. What we would expect is at the beginning of the audit, the auditor will actually be asking to see what the audit program, what the packing program is for the next couple of days, so they can identify when likely changeovers are, so that they can actually schedule that in. For line startups and the like, we would expect auditors actually to go in early to see those line startups if they're happening early in the mornings. But there will be occasions when it's just not possible to see it in a factory. We accept that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. They never end in the questions. It's we are a bit over. Just a couple more. Just take a couple more. Not too many. Irina, hello. What are possible actions to be described in the emergency food safety plan for crisis? Food poisoning occurred in all staff. So food poisons occurred in all staff. How would you go about mitigating that emergency?
Well, in that rather extreme circumstance, I think you're going to be stuck because you're not going to have any staff. So you presumably are going to be not in a position where you can actually produce. So I guess it's the sort of crisis where you either look to a co-manufacturer who can help you with it, or maybe you have arrangements with some labor providers. But most likely, in something as dramatic as that should it occur, you're not going to be able to produce, and you need to find alternative arrangements for your customers.
Yeah, I think last one. Hanu, if the site employed robots for specific work, separate audit protocol for robots. I don't know if that's a serious question. You might find it difficult to interview a robot.
Yeah, we'll have to program that, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether I think we'll have to leave it there. I'm wondering whether next year we're going to be putting together the schedule for next year, Food Safety Fridays. Maybe is it going live in February? Did you say
it is? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, maybe sometime I don't know, March, April, or something next year. We should just come on, the three of us, do a Food Safety Friday, but really not too much PowerPoint, and leave a big amount of time, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions arising. There are a lot of questions, so maybe we can do that. Okay. All right.
Okay, Simon, as far as your process works, I mean, if you want, I don't know how you normally operate, but I'd be very happy if you want to forward on questions to me. We can give you some answers which maybe you may want to post, or I'm very happy to do that if that helps.
We do that as well, David. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, what we do is we grab all these, we can download all these questions, and that'd be great. We can send those to you, and then we will post them and follow up in the email afterwards. So, right. Okay then. Thanks, Kathleen, for taking time out of your vacation. Sure. I know you've got a couple of days left. Make the most of it. And congratulations again on 10 years at DNVGL Business Assurance. So, and David, yeah, thanks very much. Very enlightening. I'm sure the audience has got a lot out of it. And yeah, hope to see you again on one in the future.
Very good. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Right, the only thing left to do is to issue the certificate, which is basically you click the download now button. That'll take you to Dropbox. You download it. You can print and sign it, or you can open it in an image editing software such as Paint, Microsoft Paint, and type your name. It's not possible for us to individually give everybody a personalized certificate because obviously take a lot of time, and it's also free of charge, this. So click the download now button, print your certificate, save it, open it in image editing, and add your own name to it. Thanks for coming today. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. Join us next week. Cor Gronfeld from FSSC 22000 will be here talking about HACCP and the strengths and weaknesses of HACCP in practice. So yeah, happy Friday. It's best day of the week. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye.